My snobbish ex-girlfriend publicly mocked me as a bottom-of-the-barrel loser who lived off women, then linked arms with a rich heir and forced me to kneel and apologize. The next second, the heads of America's 3 largest financial conglomerates and a military heavyweight entered simultaneously, bowed deeply to me, and addressed me respectfully as chairman. Meanwhile, the notoriously aloof, ice-cold female CEO publicly linked her arm with mine and, with a single move, froze all the assets of my ex-girlfriend's family. Welcome to my channel. If you love the story, don't forget to subscribe. My name is Lucas. At this moment, I was standing on the top floor of that towering glass skyscraper in the heart of Manhattan, clutching a data report that had just been tampered with. As the senior technical director of this multinational technology group, I had spent countless all-nighters in this office, using code to build the company's core technological defenses. However, after recently refusing Brad, the vice president's son, when he maliciously requested that I steal technology, not only was my performance bonus for this quarter unjustly withheld, but I also became the target of office politics-driven exclusion throughout the company. Just as I was organizing code in front of my computer screen, the phone on my desk suddenly began vibrating violently. My mother's name was flashing on the screen. I took a deep breath and pressed the answer button. My mother's voice immediately came through, filled with deep concern and helplessness. Lucas, how's work going over there in New York? You're not getting any younger. You know, a few days ago, your auntie asked someone back home to introduce you to a particularly excellent young woman. She's attractive, and her family runs a legitimate business too. Your mom was thinking that if things are really too difficult for you over there, you could find some time to come home and meet her, or I could send you her contact information, and you two could chat online first. When I heard my mother's words, a warm current rose in my heart, but it was followed by a wave of bitterness. Ever since I had come to New York alone 3 years ago to make my way in the world, my mother had always worried herself sick over my marriage. People of the older generation always believed that drifting abroad was no substitute for settling down and starting a family, but they had no idea what kind of brutal capitalist struggles and fickle human relationships I faced in a foreign land. Mom, I'm doing fine in New York, and I've made some new progress at work. Please don't worry about my marriage anymore. Holding my phone, I tried to reassure my mother on the other end of the line in as light-hearted a tone as possible. Before I could finish speaking, the office's heavy mahogany door was suddenly shoved open from outside with a forceful bang. Immediately afterward, the crisp, hurried tapping of high heels against the marble floor approached from a distance. I was momentarily stunned and looked up, only to see Elena, the young female CEO of the group, renowned throughout Wall Street for her icy beauty and ruthless decisiveness and privately dubbed the Ice Queen by the employees, striding in on custom Jimmy Choo heels. Today, Elena was dressed in an exquisitely tailored midnight blue business suit. Her long golden hair was meticulously pinned up at the back of her head, and her finely sculpted face bore not the slightest trace of superfluous emotion. An overwhelming aura that warned others to keep their distance radiated from her entire being. She had originally come to inspect the technology department's progress, but as she passed my office, she happened to overhear the conversation about my blind date on the phone. I was just about to nod to Elena with my phone in hand and explain a few things when, to my surprise, the frosty female CEO, who usually left countless executives too intimidated to speak at board meetings, walked straight over to my desk. Under the astonished gazes of both me and my mother on the other end of the line, Elena extended her slender, fair fingers and snatched the phone from beside my ear. My mind went completely blank, and my heart seemed to skip a beat. After all, in the entire group, aside from routine work reports, who would dare have any private contact with this high and mighty female CEO? Even her usual gaze carried icy shards. And yet she had just snatched away my personal phone. Before I could stop her, Elena had already placed the phone against her ear. Parting her red lips, she said clearly to my mother in an utterly calm yet undeniably commanding tone, "Hello, Auntie. I'm Lucas's fiancé. He's very busy with work. And besides, I'm already his woman, so there's no need to trouble yourself with the blind date. From now on, I'll be your daughter-in-law." The moment those words were spoken, the air throughout the office seemed to freeze. My mother on the other end of the line was clearly stunned by this sudden turn of events. She remained silent for a full 5 seconds before stammering in a trembling, utterly shocked voice, "This, young lady? Are you Lucas's boss? Or are the two of you already dating? I'm not dreaming, am I?" Elena raised her eyebrows slightly. On her icy, stunning face appeared an almost imperceptible yet breathtakingly beautiful smile. She glanced at me, who was staring at her in stunned disbelief, and once again confirmed clearly and firmly into the phone, "Auntie, you didn't hear wrong. I'm serious. Lucas is an outstanding man, with me here in New York to look after him. You and Uncle can rest assured." Having said that, Elena naturally hung up before my mother could ask any more questions, then gently placed her phone face down on my desk. After doing all this, she resumed her usual noble, aloof expression, folded her arms across her chest, and looked down at me, still in shock. Her red lips parted slightly. "What? Director Lucas. Do you have any objections to my improvisation? I snapped back to reality. My Adam's apple bobbed slightly as I looked at the peerless female CEO before me, suddenly at a loss for words. Although we usually work together seamlessly on technical projects, and I knew perfectly well how much this female boss appreciated me professionally, her words just now, "I'm your daughter-in-law," had struck like a bolt from the blue, completely overturning everything I thought I knew about her. Just as I was about to open my mouth, a mocking, sarcastic laugh suddenly came from outside the office door. Brad, the group vice president's son, was leaning arrogantly against the doorframe with a Starbucks coffee in his hand. He cast me a sidelong glance, his eyes filled with undisguised jealousy and contempt. Well, who do we have here? It turns out our technical director is making a long-distance call to his family during work hours. What's wrong? Lucas? Can't make it in the company anymore. So you're planning to turn things around by relying on your family to set you up on a blind date? Though you seem to be having quite a nice chat just now. What? Did you even forget to lock the technical director's office door? Aren't you afraid of damaging the company's image? Brad had coveted the position of technical director for a long time. On top of that, after I rejected his request to violate company regulations some time ago, he had held a grudge against me, always looking for an opportunity to drive me out of this position. Now that he saw CEO Elena in the office as well, he deliberately raised his voice, trying to smear me in front of the company's highest-ranking executive, and humiliate me completely. Several department managers passing by heard the commotion and stopped as well, peering into the office with Schadenfreude and whispering among themselves. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a powerless, low-level technical employee who did nothing but bury himself in code. Faced with the vice president's son, I had no ability to fight back at all. I stared coldly at Brad in the doorway and was just about to retort when Elena, beside me, made the first move. The frosty female CEO's expression darkened completely the instant Brad spoke. She did not even look him in the eye. Instead, she turned around, casually picked up the data report on the desk, the one Brad had just maliciously tampered with, and spoke in a voice cold enough to freeze blood. Vice President Brad, who gave you the authority to alter the database report for a core project without the technical director's permission? The smug smile on Brad's face froze instantly. Somewhat flustered, he stammered in his defense. President Elena, I did this for the sake of the company project's progress. Lucas is just too inefficient. Shut up. Elena cut Brad off sharply. The powerful pressure radiating from her seemed to lower the temperature of the entire floor by several degrees. The company has always placed great importance on the intellectual property rights and compliance of core technologies. Brad, the legal department has already placed the investigation report concerning your suspected unauthorized access to confidential data and suppression of key technical personnel on my desk. At these words, Brad's face instantly turned deathly pale, and cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He never could have imagined that the CEO, who had always turned a blind eye to the company's internal power struggles, would publicly confront the son of a managing vice president today, all for the sake of an ordinary, low-ranking technical director. I stood to the side, watching the icy female CEO who had just assertively declared her claim over me on the phone and was now taking swift, decisive action to stand up for me and punish the villain. The cold world inside me seemed to be infused with a scorching current of warmth. I raised the corners of my mouth slightly as I looked at Brad's ashen face, a cold glint flashing in my eyes. My counterattack was only just beginning. After leaving the executive office on the top floor, I didn't go straight home. Although Brad, the son of Vice President Blake, had been temporarily suspended pending an internal investigation under Elena's swift and decisive measures, I knew all too well that this spoiled heir, who through his family's influence around the company, would never let things go. Sure enough, at dusk, just after I stepped out of the building in Midtown Manhattan, my phone began to vibrate. An unfamiliar local number appeared on the screen. When I answered, Brad's sinister, mocking voice came through. Lucas, don't think that just because you have the president backing you, you can run the company however you please. 8 o'clock tonight, Victoria, the upscale restaurant on Park Avenue in Manhattan's Upper East Side. I want to see you. If you don't show up, do you believe I'll have the legal department completely destroy you tomorrow on charges of leaking trade secrets? The call ended immediately, giving me no chance to refuse. I let out a cold laugh. I had always found such harmless threats ridiculous, but since he had gone to the trouble of laying out a trap for me, I might as well see what tricks this arrogant rich kid had up his sleeve. At 10 to 8 that evening, dressed in a freshly laundered casual suit, I arrived at the entrance of Victoria Restaurant on time. Located in Manhattan's Upper East Side, the restaurant had long been one of New York's premier gathering places for the wealthy and influential, frequented exclusively by high-ranking figures dressed in custom-tailored formal wear. The host at the entrance initially seemed ready to show some disdain at my outfit, but the moment he saw me take out the high-end VIP black card issued to me by the company, his attitude instantly became exceedingly respectful, and he bowed as he ushered me into the main dining area. Passing through the ornately carved archway, I immediately spotted Brad sitting in the prime seat by the window, and beside him sat someone I would never forget. Even if she were reduced to ashes, my ex-girlfriend, Michelle. Michelle had made a special effort to dress up today. She was wearing an expensive Chanel limited edition dress, with a dazzling diamond necklace around her neck. 6 months ago, just when I was working late into the night on the company's core project and needed support the most, she had unhesitatingly thrown a breakup agreement in my face, scornfully dismissing me as nothing more than a low-level programmer living on a fixed salary, barely able to afford a decent apartment in Manhattan. And now, she was nestling coquettishly in Brad's arms, a wineglass in hand, her face wearing an air of lofty superiority. Expressionless, I walked over, pulled out the leather chair opposite them, and sat down. When Brad saw that I had actually dared to show up alone, a vicious grin immediately spread across his face. He picked up the Bordeaux on the table and gently swirled it, casting me a sidelong glance as he said, his tone laced with undisguised mockery and contempt. Well, look at that, our director Lucas really does have some nerve. What's the matter? You climbed from a code-writing grunt to a director's chair all by yourself. And now you think you're hot stuff? You actually dare to challenge me at the company? Michelle also elegantly set down the wineglass in her hand, with an utterly cold gaze, as if she were looking at a homeless man by the roadside. She looked me up and down, the corners of her mouth curling into a sharp, contemptuous smile. Lucas, I never thought that after several months apart, you'd still look this pathetic and impoverished. Do you really think that by sucking up in the office and making the female CEO happy, you can turn from a sparrow into a phoenix? Stop dreaming. The profit from any random project in the Braid family's portfolio is an astronomical figure you couldn't earn in 10 years. Even if you either ate nor drank, you and we don't belong to the same world. Faced with this shameless couple trading insults back and forth, I didn't even lift my eyelids. I picked up a glass of ice water the waiter had just poured and took a small sip, my tone as calm as if I were discussing the weather. Michelle, if you invited me here tonight just to show off that you've latched onto a useless freeloader who throws his weight around by relying on his father, then I suggest you save your breath, because your taste is so terrible that it disgusts me. What did you say? Michelle's face instantly turned livid. She slammed her hand on the table and screamed. Lucas, what right does a useless freeloader like you have to criticize me? If I hadn't dumped you back then, you'd still be down in a basement eating sandwiches. What do you think you are at the company? One word from Braid is enough to ruin your reputation and drive you out of New York. Seeing Michelle lose her temper, Braid became even more smug. He abruptly stood up and pointed down at my nose, threatening viciously. Listen carefully, boy. Get on your knees and apologize to Michelle immediately. Then sign the internal resignation letter tomorrow morning and leave the company on your own. Otherwise, I'll not only make sure you can never find another job in Manhattan's tech industry, I'll also show you what it feels like to offend the Vanderbilt family. The wealthy diners and celebrities seated nearby heard the argument and turned to look, gloating as they whispered about me, the penniless nobody who clearly didn't know his place. In their eyes, faced with the pressure of a rich heir, I had no choice but to bow my head and admit defeat. However, just as I was about to tear off their hypocritical masks once and for all, an extremely light yet inexplicably powerful click of high heels suddenly came from the restaurant entrance. Immediately afterward, all the murmuring in the hall came to an abrupt stop. I slowly raised my head and saw Elena standing at the restaurant entrance, dressed in a dark blue business suit and radiating an overwhelming presence. She had apparently come straight from some important business banquet, still holding a tablet in her hand. When her icy gaze swept across the room and finally landed precisely on our table, the temperature in the entire restaurant seemed to plunge to freezing point in an instant. The sneer on Blythe's face instantly froze. He never would have imagined that the Frost Queen CEO, who was rarely seen in person, would come to such an upscale restaurant herself, and actually stumble upon this scene. He hurriedly lowered the hand he had been pointing at me with and stammered a greeting. President Elena. What brings you here? Elena did not even spare Brad a proper glance. In her high heels, she walked straight to my side as though no one else existed. Under the shocked gaze of hundreds of people throughout the room, this famously aloof and proud supreme executive of the group, someone feared and respected even by countless business tycoons, naturally reached out and gently straightened the collar of my suit. Then Elena turned her head. Her cold, striking eyes swept over Brad and Michelle, whose faces had gone deathly pale, like sharp blades. Parting her red lips, she spoke in a voice that was not loud but carried clearly throughout the entire restaurant. Brad, were you threatening my fiancée just now? It seems the company's internal suspension investigation into you was far too lenient. First thing tomorrow morning, the legal department will not only formally file criminal charges against you for commercial fraud, but your father, the vice president, will also undergo a full board audit for suspected embezzlement of company funds. As for this young lady, Elena cast a cold glance at Michelle, who was already trembling all over. Watch your mouth, because the person you just insulted is the true future partner of this multinational group. The moment those words were spoken, the entire restaurant fell into deathly silence. Brad's legs gave way, and he nearly collapsed onto the floor. Michelle's face turned ashen. Her mind went completely blank. looking at me and the icy female CEO standing beside me. She was overwhelmed by regret and fear. I lifted my glass, looking at the two people whose faces had turned deathly pale, and a cold, mocking curve formed at the corners of my lips. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at Victoria's restaurant. During those few days, it was as though a silent financial storm had swept through Manhattan's business circles. Brad had not only been officially fired by the group and handed over to the judicial authorities for suspected involvement in multiple violations and embezzlement of company assets, but his father, the vice president who had entrenched himself in the company for years, had also been forcibly suspended by the board pending a thorough audit. As for Michelle, I heard that because she had become entangled in some of Brad's underground money transfers, she had been listed as a key person of interest by the local police. Her reputation was utterly ruined. At that moment, I was sitting in a private office at the company's Technology Research and Development Center, with dense streams of code and data constantly flashing across the 3 widescreen monitors in front of me. Although the turmoil outside had been raging, my life had become unusually peaceful, ever since Elena had publicly come to my defense at the restaurant that night, and once again declared her claim over me. The colleagues who had previously mocked and sneered at me now looked at me with awe and apprehension. No one dared come to the technology department looking for trouble anymore. Just as I was concentrating on typing at the keyboard, trying to overcome the final technical barrier in the next-generation artificial intelligence encryption core, there were 2 soft knocks on the office door. Before I could respond, the door opened, and Elena walked in holding a steaming cup of black coffee. Today, she wasn't wearing that extremely austere navy blue business suit. Instead, she had changed into a simple, elegantly tailored ivory cashmere sweater. Her long hair fell smoothly over her shoulders, softening her usual cold, fierce demeanor and giving her a gentle, heart-stirring charm. She walked over to my desk and lightly set the coffee beside my hand. Her gaze swept across the complex code on the screen, and her red lips pressed together slightly. Lucas, you've been working for 4 hours straight. Even the healthiest body can't withstand such intense overexertion. I stopped what I was doing, picked up the coffee, and took a sip. Its bitterness carried a hint of rich aroma. I looked up at the elegant, icily beautiful CEO and couldn't help teasing her with a smile. Director Elena, if the executives who tremble in fear around you every day saw you fussing over someone like this, I'm afraid the entire board's jaws would hit the floor. At my words, a trace of barely perceptible shyness flickered through Elena's otherwise calm eyes, but she quickly resumed her haughty expression, folded her arms over her chest, and looked down at me disdainfully. What? As the group's chief executive officer, am I not allowed to show some concern for the health of our chief technology officer? Don't forget, I openly admitted our relationship over the phone that day, right in front of your mother. Mentioning what happened that day made my heart grow faintly warm. Although I knew that much of what Elena had done was to help me out of a difficult situation and take the opportunity to bring the company's internal factional struggles under control, her unreserved trust and domineering willingness to protect me had truly touched the strings of my heart, long sealed away. All right, to live up to Director Elena's concern, I promise I'll finish testing this core code within half an hour. I put aside my joking manner and said seriously, but now that you mention it, although Blade has been placed under investigation, his family's influence runs deep throughout Wall Street, and there also seem to be some overseas underground funds secretly fanning the flames behind the scenes. Through technical means, I've discovered over the past 2 days that someone is attempting to maliciously infiltrate our core database and steal our code from outside. Upon hearing this, the relaxed expression on Elena's face vanished instantly, replaced by a look of solemnity. She pulled over a chair and sat down beside me, leaning forward slightly as her tone became extremely serious. Are you saying that the people behind Blade haven't backed down, but instead plan to launch a devastating technological attack against us directly? Exactly. My slender fingers tapped lightly on the keyboard a few times, bringing up a highly encrypted tracking interface. The IP address they're using has been disguised through multiple proxy layers. On the surface, it appears to originate from an anonymous hacker group in Europe, but by tracing it backward through vulnerabilities in the underlying architecture, I discovered that the coding habits and logical characteristics of this attack code are virtually identical to those of a notorious hostile takeover fund on Wall Street from several years ago. And the fund's principal backer was none other than Blade's family. Elena stared at the constantly flashing red warning coordinates on the screen, a cold glint passing through her eyes. As one of Wall Street's top businesswomen, she immediately understood what this meant. They're making a desperate last stand, since they can't defeat us openly. They plan to steal our core technical secrets and short our stock on the market. They've greatly underestimated the defenses here. I let out a cold laugh, my fingers flying across the keyboard as streams of code flowed across the screen like waterfalls. Since they dared to reach in, I'll not only make sure they return empty-handed, I'll follow the trail and tear out the entire underground funding network they've hidden overseas by the roots. Watching my focused, confident profile, Elena's eyes revealed undisguised admiration and tenderness. She sat quietly, watching me manipulate the virtual world as I pleased, as though with me there, No storm could ever shake the foundations of this business empire. Just then, my phone suddenly began to vibrate. An alert from an unknown encrypted channel popped up on the screen. I tapped it open, my brows drawing together slightly as my expression gradually grew more solemn. What's wrong? Elena noticed that something was off and asked softly. I put down the work in my hands and turned to look at her. My tone was calm, yet carried an undeniable force. Looks like our old friends can't sit still anymore. It's not just online attacks. The other side seems to have joined forces with certain shadowy external powers, preparing to cause us serious trouble in the real world. But it doesn't matter. I've already laid the groundwork. All that's left is for them to jump into this carefully prepared trap themselves. Elena watched the cold glint flicker in my eyes and nodded slightly, the corners of her lips curving into a breathtaking smile. Go ahead and do what you need to do, Lucas. No matter what happens, the entire group will always be your strongest support. 5 days had passed since the cyber counterattack at the technology center. The skies over Manhattan were dark with clouds, and the air carried the grim chill of early winter. During those few days, the Brad family's remaining influence on Wall Street had been scrambling like ants on a hot pan. Not only were they suffering defeat after defeat in the capital markets, but evidence of their illegal operations had also been precisely delivered to the FBI's desk through the underlying architecture. However, just as Elena and I were preparing to close the net for good, an even larger and more covert external force began stirring in the shadows, attempting to interfere in this business battle through the most primitive and most brutal means. At 2 in the afternoon, I was in the office on the top floor of the group's headquarters, going over the next phase of the asset liquidation plan with Elena, when the encrypted satellite phone on the desk suddenly began vibrating violently without warning. The security level of this channel was exceptionally high. Only the closest comrades with whom I had shared life-or-death situations during special missions overseas in the past would use it. I was momentarily stunned, then immediately answered the call. From the other end came old Marcus's unmistakable, thunderous, hearty laughter. Ha ha, Lucas, my old comrade in arms. I hear you've really made something of yourself. Kid, not only have you become the technology director of a tech conglomerate in Manhattan, but you've also reduced those arrogant Wall Street princelings to tears, crying for their daddies? So, have you been missing the days when we fought side by side in the desert? Hearing old Marcus's voice, a long-lost warmth welled up inside me. Old Marcus was the central titan of America's old-line military-industrial complex and its shadowy conglomerates, with connections reaching everywhere. Back then, he had been my strongest support overseas, although he had long since withdrawn behind the scenes. His former protégés and associates could still be found throughout America's military-industrial circles and its top political and business networks. Old man, your information is pretty sharp. I'm busy dealing with a few fleas jumping all over the place right now. You call at a time like this. Don't tell me you're calling just to watch me make a fool of myself? I leaned back in the leather executive chair, teasing him with a relaxed smile at the corners of my mouth. Across the desk, Elena slightly raised her originally focused gaze upon hearing the tone of my conversation. A trace of surprise flashed through her cool eyes. Although she knew my background was anything but simple, there were absolutely few people in New York's financial circles who could speak to one of America's top shadowy titans with such familiarity and a hint of teasing. The old Marcus on the other end of the phone stopped laughing, his tone instantly turning serious. In a low voice, he said, "You little punk, quit mouthing off to me. I just got word that those desperate bastards from the Blade family have spent a fortune hiring a bunch of mercenaries from Europe, local thugs who'll do anything for money. They're planning to use armed intimidation and kidnapping against you and your company in the real world, trying to force you to hand over the encryption keys to your core technology. Those men have already landed in New York. This time, I'm personally leading a team into Manhattan, not only to help you wipe out that trash completely, but also to back you on Wall Street. Let's see who dares lay a hand on my brother." At those words, my gaze instantly sharpened like a blade. Although legitimate legal and financial tactics were the primary weapons in commercial competition in a modern city, there were always desperate outlaws who fantasized about resorting to illegal violence. The Blade family was clearly planning to tear off the mask and fight to the bitter end. "Fine, old man. Since they want to play rough, I'll see it through to the end," I said coldly. "Take your people directly to the joint terminal in Lower Manhattan and set up a perimeter. I've already pinpointed where these mercenaries are hiding." After hanging up, I raised my head and met Elena's eyes, filled with concern and curiosity. She gently set down the documents in her hands, stood, and walked over to me. Although there was a trace of worry in her voice, it was outweighed by her completely unreserved trust. "Lucas, that phone call just now. Did something happen? Is it that the Blades have grown desperate and are planning to resort to illegal methods?" I looked at the always aloof and arrogant ice-cold female CEO before me, whose eyes were now filled entirely with me. My heart warmed, and I reached out to gently take her slightly cool fingers, my voice calm and resolute. "Don't worry, Elena. Clowns like them will never be able to stir up a storm. As it happens, one of my elders just arrived in New York with his people. Tonight, we'll wipe out these rats hiding in the gutter once and for all." Feeling the warmth in her hand, Elena nodded gently. Although she was the group's CEO, at that moment, she chose to entrust all her sense of security to me without reservation. At 10 that night, the sea wind howled through the abandoned United Pier in Lower Manhattan. Cold rain mixed with the salty seawater as it lashed against the dilapidated wooden boardwalk. Several black luxury sedans came to a silent stop in the shadows. Their doors opened, and old Marcus quickly got out with a team of heavily armed, stern-faced elite security personnel, joining me, as I had been waiting there for some time. Meanwhile, in a dark room inside the pier warehouse, the European mercenaries whom Blade had hired at great expense were armed and preparing to sneak into the group's headquarters at night to carry out a kidnapping and extortion scheme. However, before they could even step through the warehouse doors, searchlights suddenly blazed all around them, turning night into day. Dozens of highly trained elite security personnel closed in from every direction, their ominous gun barrels instantly sealing off every possible escape route. Brad's supposedly foolproof plan was as fragile as a sheet of paper in the face of overwhelming strength and military backing. Watching the mercenary leader being subdued on the spot by old Marcus's men and pinned to the ground like a dead dog, I stood in the curtain of rain, slowly took out my phone, and dialed Brad's number. The call was answered after only 2 rings. Brad's panicked, hysterical roar came from the other end. "Lucas? What the hell did you do to my mercenaries? You pathetic technician. How could you possibly?" I coldly cut off his tirade, my voice like a judgment from hell. "Brad, the game is over. From this moment on, prepare to face the judgment of your family's complete bankruptcy and imprisonment." With that, I hung up directly and casually tossed the phone to the assistant behind me. In the night sky, rain and snow fell together. I turned around and looked at the coldly aloof Elena beside me, my mind utterly clear. My counterattack had entered its final stage. The Thunder operation at the Allied docks quietly closed its net late at night. The foreign mercenaries heavily hired by the Blades did not even have time to draw their weapons before being completely subdued by old Marcus and his men. With the evidence conclusive, the gangsters, along with the illegal financial transactions funding them, were handed over to the FBI that very night. Over the next few days, Manhattan's financial sector seemed to be hit by a magnitude 10 earthquake, because the Blade family's businesses were suspected of multiple felonies, including hiring criminal gangs, malicious commercial intimidation, and serious money laundering. Their stock was immediately halted the moment the Nasdaq opened. At that moment, I was sitting in the chairman's office on the top floor of the group headquarters, holding a cup of warm black coffee and calmly watching the red and green lines on my computer screen continue to plunge. Elena stood beside me, her eyes likewise fixed on the asset liquidation report the legal department had just delivered. This usually decisive and ruthless ice queen of the business world now wore a relaxed, appreciative smile. "Lucas, I never imagined that you would not only be an impeccable genius technically, but also completely outmaneuver the Blade father and son in capital strategy and counterattacks." Elena turned to look at me, her voice carrying a gentleness and admiration that even she herself had not noticed. "The Blade family's board of directors is now in complete chaos, and their core assets are being frantically carved up and devoured by major banks and creditors. The once arrogant Vanderbilt family has truly lost any chance of recovering this time." I set down my coffee cup, turned to meet her gaze, and smiled faintly. "The business world is a battlefield. Since they chose to use the most despicable underhanded tactics against us, they should have been prepared to bear the consequences 100-fold. From the moment they attempted to steal our core technology through illegal means, their fate was already sealed." The office door was knocked on while we were talking. The secretary pushed the door open and hurried in, her expression somewhat peculiar as she reported, "Director Lucas, President Elena, there are several uninvited guests in the lobby downstairs. They claim to be Brad's father, in other words, the company's former vice president. He's brought his ex-girlfriend Michelle with him, and they insist on forcing their way up to see you. The receptionist couldn't stop them, and they're making a huge scene by the elevators right now." At the sound of that name, I raised my eyebrows slightly. Michelle? Ever since she had publicly humiliated me at Victoria Restaurant last time, that snobbish woman had vanished completely from my world. I never expected that, now that the Brad family had fallen from power, she would become entangled with the down-and-out Brad father and son, and come here in such a sorry state to make one last desperate stand. Elena's expression darkened instantly, and a chill faintly emerged from her. "Humph. These beaten dogs still have the nerve to come to the group headquarters and cause trouble? Are the security guards just sitting around doing nothing? Have the security department throw them out immediately." "Wait." I raised my hand to stop Elena, a cold, mocking glint flashing in my eyes. "Since they've come to us of their own accord looking to be humiliated, why not let them come up? Some accounts deserve to be settled thoroughly, face to face, so they won't keep going around outside like flies, disgusting everyone." Elena looked at my confident, resolute expression and nodded slightly before waving to the secretary. "Let them come up, but alert the security guards in the lobby. If they make any excessive move, report it to the police immediately as unlawful entry." In less than 10 minutes, The office's heavy mahogany door was once again shoved open roughly. The former vice president, who had once enjoyed immense prestige and thrown his weight around at the company, now had graying hair and a dejected expression. His bespoke suit looked rumpled, and he seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. Michelle, following behind him, was in an even more pitiful state. Her originally immaculate makeup was completely streaked with tears. Her expensive Chanel handbag was nowhere to be seen, and she was wearing a bulky down jacket. There was no trace of the arrogant, imperious woman she had been at the restaurant. The moment Brad's father saw me sitting calmly behind the desk, his legs went weak, and he nearly fell to his knees. He no longer cared about the dignity of a vice president. Rushing to the desk, he braced himself against it with both hands and pleaded in a trembling voice. Lucas! No, Director Lucas! We father and son were blind before. We failed to recognize the mountain before us. And we never should have opposed you. Please, have mercy and spare our family. As long as you're willing to say a word for us to the judge and the economic crimes investigators and help unfreeze part of our frozen overseas funds, we'll immediately transfer all the shares under our names to you unconditionally. Please! Michelle hurried over right behind him. She looked at me, her eyes filled with terror, despair, and boundless regret. She never could have imagined that the poor programmer she had once despised in every possible way, believing he would spend his entire life writing code at the bottom of the ladder, had now become the person in power who controlled her life and death. Lucas, I was wrong before. I was blind, completely bewitched by that useless piece of trash. Brad. Michelle wept so hard that tears streamed down her face like pear blossoms in the rain. She tried to reach out and grab the sleeve of my suit, choking back sobs as she said, After all, we were together for such a long time. You must still have feelings for me. Right. Please, for the sake of our past, take me away from here and save me. I don't want to go to prison. Looking at these two pathetic, sobbing people before me, stripped of all dignity, I felt only a wave of ridicule and sorrow. I slowly leaned back against the chair, crossed my arms over my chest, and looked at them with an utterly calm gaze that nevertheless carried a bone-chilling coldness. Our past? I let out a cold laugh. My voice was not loud, but it struck their hearts like a heavy hammer. Michelle, when you despised me for being poor at the time I needed your support most and unhesitatingly threw the breakup agreement in my face, why didn't you mention our past? When Brad teamed up with outsiders to trip me up at every turn, and even hired criminal forces to kidnap me, why didn't you mention our past? Michelle's face instantly turned as pale as paper. She opened her mouth, but could not utter a single word in her defense. The facts were right before her eyes. She had once personally thrown away the most precious pearl in the entire world, only to be left with empty joy and a devastating disaster. Brad's father, seeing that pleading with me was useless, hurriedly placed his hopes in Elena, who was sitting nearby, and cried out desperately, President Elena, you can't just stand by and let the company fall apart. We've rendered outstanding service to the company. Elena coldly cut him off. The icy aura radiating from her made him instantly fall silent. She lifted her teacup and gently blew away the foam, her tone utterly ruthless. Outstanding service? When you and your son were embezzling and taking bribes within the company, betraying it for personal gain, did you ever think this day would come? You're not welcome here. Security, take them away. At Elena's command, several tall, professional security guards quickly entered the office. Without a word, they each grabbed one side of the limp Brad father and son and the dazed Michelle, forcibly dragging them out of the office. Their desperate cries and pleas for mercy echoed through the corridor, but were soon drowned out by the sound of the elevator doors closing. The office soon fell silent again. I turned my head and looked at Elena beside me. Her expression was aloof, though a hint of a smile touched the corners of her eyes. An unprecedented sense of satisfaction and peace welled up inside me. Our greatest obstacle had been completely removed, and the future that belonged to us had only just begun its most glorious chapter. 2 weeks had passed since Brad, his son, and Michelle had been forcibly taken away from the group's headquarters. Early winter in Manhattan had brought the first real snowstorm of the season, with snowflakes swirling through the sky and draping the entire city in silver. During this time, Wall Street's capital structure had undergone a seismic reorganization. Following the complete collapse and liquidation of Vanderbilt Investment Company, the overseas underground capital forces that had secretly fueled the turmoil were also purged in a joint operation by the FBI and the Treasury Department. Meanwhile, the multinational technology group led by Elena and me had not only seen its market value multiply several times over within the industry, but had also become the undisputed absolute hegemon of America's technology and capital sectors. At that moment, I was sitting in an exclusive top-tier tea room in Midtown Manhattan overlooking Central Park. Snow was falling outside, while the room was filled with warmth. Delicate tea pastries were arranged on the table as I calmly and thoughtfully studied a final strategic plan for the company's global technology deployment. The door opened softly, and Elena walked in. She was wearing an elegant black cashmere coat, her long hair fluttering gently in the breeze, and her face carried a relaxed softness, as though she had finally set down all the burdens of the business world. She sat down across from me and casually placed the document just delivered from headquarters on the table. Her gentle gaze settled on me. Lucas, all outstanding payments and asset liquidations have been completed. From today onward, the company will have no internal resistance left. The board has unanimously approved the highest possible budget allocation for the next generation global artificial intelligence research and development center you're leading. I lifted my teacup and took a sip, looking at this ice-cold female CEO in public, who had long since dropped all her defenses in front of me. I let a faint smile curl at the corners of my lips. You've worked hard, Elena. From being the initial technical director to taking complete control today. I owe you a great deal. If not for that domineering declaration you made in the office back then, I am your daughter-in-law, I would have had to deal with quite a few unnecessary complications. At the mention of this, a barely perceptible blush rose to Elena's ears. She gave a soft snort, picked up the glass of water in front of her, and shot me a look with a tone that was both coy and indulgent. What? Director Lucas, do you still think I was joking back then? When I, Elena, say something, I never take it back. You, on the other hand, have seemed like an unshakable block of wood ever since we met. Aren't you planning to give me a proper answer? Seeing this rare display of coquettishness from her, I felt a warmth I had never experienced before well up inside me. Although we had endured countless fierce battles in the business world and crushed every enemy in our path, on this snowy winter night, as we returned to the realm of our truest feelings, the understanding between us had long surpassed 1,000 words. Just then, my phone suddenly vibrated. A WeChat message from my mother popped up on the screen. Lucas, Mom heard that everything in New York has been settled successfully. That girl who was with you on the phone last time. When are you bringing her home to meet your father and me? Everyone in the family is looking forward to it. Looking at my mother's message, I couldn't help laughing. I casually turned the phone toward Elena so she could see it. My mom is urging us again. She's asking when we're going back home to hold the wedding. Elena read the words on her phone screen, and the cool reserve in her eyes was instantly filled with the radiance of happiness. She gently bit her lower lip, then raised her head and looked straight into my eyes, her voice firm yet tender. Then let's arrange it for this weekend. I've already had my assistant book a private flight straight to your hometown, since I promised your aunt over the phone back then. As her daughter-in-law, I should of course pay her a formal visit in person. Hearing this, the last trace of restlessness from my years of drifting completely vanished. From a low-level programmer who had left home 3 years ago only to endure scorn and ridicule, to an industry titan now controlling the lifeblood of America's economy and technology, and winning the heart of the woman I loved, I had achieved the most complete comeback through my own actions. The wind and snow continued to howl outside, but our brand new life had only just welcomed its warmest spring. The warm winter sunlight of Manhattan spilled across the pristine snow of Central Park, reflecting a dazzling, pure radiance. Today was the weekend, and also the day Elena and I would set off to my hometown to visit my parents. A few days earlier, when the final bankruptcy liquidation proceedings against Vanderbilt Investment Company were officially concluded in federal court, the storm that had swept through America's financial and technology circles finally came to an end. The powerful elites and snobs who had once looked down on me and trampled me underfoot had now paid a heavy price under the judgment of the law and absolute capital, and Elena and I had finally reached our perfect ending. At 10 in the morning, beside Manhattan's private helicopter landing pad, a luxurious private jet painted with a custom emblem sat quietly on the runway, waiting for departure. Elena and I stepped out of the private car side by side. Today, Elena was not wearing the kind of professional suit that usually kept people at a distance. Instead, she wore a warm ivory cashmere coat paired with an exquisite scarf, her long hair falling smoothly over her shoulders. Although her features remained refined and strikingly beautiful, her eyes and brows now carried the gentle tenderness of a woman deeply in love. Is all the luggage taken care of? Elena turned her head slightly to look at me beside her, and asked softly. I smiled and nodded, reaching out to gently smooth the strands of hair the cold wind had tousled. Don't worry, everything was arranged ages ago. Besides, my mom called especially yesterday to say she'd prepared a whole table full of steaming hot dishes at home, just waiting for us to land. At the mention of Mom, a hint of shyness and nervousness, almost impossible to detect, flickered through Elena's calm eyes. This frosty female CEO, decisive and ruthless on Wall Street, who had struck fear into countless business tycoons, now looked like a bashful girl meeting her future in-laws for the first time. She lightly bit her lower lip. I prepared some gifts. Do you think your aunt will like them? Won't they seem too extravagant? Seeing this rare look of worry and uncertainty on her face, I couldn't help but chuckle. I reached out and pulled her into my arms, soothing her in a low voice. All right, don't worry. My mom is an extremely simple and kind-hearted person. She doesn't care about luxury gifts or anything like that, as long as she sees that the two of us are doing well. That's worth more to her than anything. Besides, you already won the title of daughter-in-law over the phone. She's been eagerly looking forward to meeting you. Hearing this, Elena shot me an adorably reproachful glance and lightly punched me in the chest. But she simply couldn't hide the smile at the corners of her mouth. Just as we were preparing to board, my phone suddenly vibrated. It was a final financial settlement notice from the bank, stating that the Vanderbilt family's core assets, forcibly seized and auctioned off, had all been transferred to the joint charitable and technology development foundation established in Elena's and my names. Those who had once tried to trample on my dignity with money and power had ended up with nothing, and would have to live forever under the shadow of liquidation. I casually put my phone away and never looked at it again. All the humiliation and disgrace of the past dispersed like snowflakes carried away by the wind, no longer capable of stirring even the slightest ripple in my heart. With our arms linked, we stepped steadily through the soft snow and boarded the private jet that would carry us toward the future. As the cabin door slowly closed, the engines issued a deep, powerful roar, and the plane rose into the sky, soaring straight into the clouds. Through the window, Manhattan's dazzling skyline gradually shrank below us, eventually becoming a brilliant sea of stars. Recalling 3 years ago, I arrived in this cold and unforgiving city alone, carrying nothing but a simple bag. I faced my ex-girlfriend's sarcastic taunts, the ruthless ostracism within the company, and countless late nights spent writing code that nearly crushed me. If it hadn't been for the pride deep within me that refused to sink into despair, along with the help of benefactors and my eventual awakening at the top of the pyramid, I might have long since become yet another failed person swallowed by this city. Yet fate always leaves a gateway to the summit for those who are truly prepared, even in the depths of despair. Not only did I complete the most thorough comeback with elite technology and capital, ruthlessly crushing beneath my feet everyone who had once looked down on or humiliated me, but I also won the love of the finest woman in the entire world, the woman who loved me most. The plane flew smoothly above the clouds, sunlight filling the cabin. Elena leaned gently against my shoulder, closed her eyes, and savored this hard-won peace and happiness. I turned my head, gazed at her quiet and beautiful profile, and reached out to clasp her slender, warm fingers tightly. The snowstorm had passed. At the end of the long night, our glorious life and warm years ahead lay before us. Hand in hand, we were walking toward a spring that would never end. The end. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you.